You've lived a great life and done well for yourself. But what mark will you leave on the world? How will you inspire future generations? Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand have helped thousands of people answer exactly those questions. If you've ever wondered, what will be my legacy? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast. Now, here are your hosts, Stan and Katie Beth.
Welcome to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast with your hosts, Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. Our guest today is the founder of Sarah Michelle NP Reviews and currently serves as the Chief Nursing Officer at Blueprint Test Prep, Sarah Michelle Boes. Sarah, we are so excited to have you with us on the show today.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate both of y'all's time.
Absolutely. So before we dive in with all of our questions, tell us a little bit. You have a very varied, very interesting background. Tell us a little bit about your backstory and how that kind of got you to where you are today.
Absolutely. I feel like I have lived 5 lifetimes in the last 5 years, so I'll try to condense it down in a way that makes sense. But I grew up in really rural Eastern Kentucky. And I always thought that one day I would be a teacher, but I actually went the nursing route instead. Both my parents are teachers, and they were like, please, absolutely do not be a teacher, actually. And when I was in nursing school, I still had this really kind of like burning passion and desire to teach. And I decided for myself that once I made it through nursing school, because I was tutoring students, I loved that I would eventually go on to be a nursing educator. And so by the time I was 25, I had 3 college degrees. I have a master's in nursing education, but I also had a postmaster's as a family nurse practitioner. And it just so happened that my graduation season from nurse practitioner school fell right during the height of COVID. And so everything that I thought was coming after this magical graduation kind of halted for a second. But for me, it was actually beautiful, divine intervention because for the first time in my life, because like I said, I had 3 degrees by the time I was 25. So, I was pushing, I was working full-time jobs, I was doing full-time school. There was no time in my schedule ever. And it was the first time that I had just genuine time to sit and think about what I wanted to do while I was waiting for this nurse practitioner job to open up. And what I found was I kind of accidentally created my own business because, like I said, I like to tutor, I like to teach, and I knew one day I would be teaching at a larger scale. I didn't know what that would look like. But at the time that I graduated, there was all of this anxiety about taking your nurse practitioner exam because it was COVID and you show up to a testing center and it would be closed. And so it became all this anticipation all the time. And it wasn't just me, it was all of my classmates too. But after I took that exam and passed, I was like, wow, this was so much easier than I anticipated. And I way over prepared. And really what I needed was the confidence in myself and just the assurance in myself that I could do it. Because if you can graduate nurse practitioner school, you can absolutely pass the exam. And so out of that spawned this little 3-hour Zoom recording where I talked through people through not only the content of the exam, but how they could feel really good about themselves as they walked into the exam. And in my first week of creating that course, I made what I used to make in a month as a nurse. And I was like, okay, like this is pretty cool. Like, what if I just made $1,000 every day? Like, what would my life look like? What would my impact look like? And right at the 2-year mark, I actually went on to sell that business. It kind of grew beyond my wildest dreams. I was in no way trying to create a big, massive business, but people were really excited about it and it really resonated with them to kind of have that mental health focus. And so I've thought a lot here recently, especially I thought the before and after moment of my life would be creating that business because everything's been different that's come after it. But really, the before and after moment of my life was having my daughter. And so in June of 2022, I sold my business. I rode the highest high of my life. I was so excited. I was at 8.5 months pregnant at the time. And at 9 months pregnant, just a couple weeks before giving birth, we found out my daughter was going to have a set of 4 different heart defects. And all of the care and surgeries, and this is a lifelong chronic condition. So like trying to take that in the last few weeks of pregnancy, after you just went through a big acquisition, all the expectations of the acquisition too was a really tough time in my life because she had her first surgery at just 6 days old. And then she went on to have five more surgeries by the time she was 6 months old. And as of today, unless medicine changes and catches up to her, which I very much hope that it will, she will have four more open heart surgeries throughout her lifetime. So really what has happened for me over the last couple of years, because she's 2.5 now, is I feel like my life, my passions, my purpose has completely shifted into congenital heart disease. And if you hear nothing else from this episode, what I want people to know is that heart defects are the most common birth defect, but they're one of the most underfunded as well. And so my hope and my mission for the rest of my life, and I'm in a really fortunate position to be able to do so because my entrepreneurial journey is to change that statistic and ultimately change my daughter's life and those that are like her too.
That is definitely just your overview is I can see why you feel
It's a
like
lot.
you've lived 5 lifetimes in 5 years. I mean, this starting on your, so first of all, let me back up and say I am the daughter of an English teacher. She taught English and drama for 37 years. She
Wow.
retired right before she was going to do 38 and then retired to stay home with my children so that I could go back to work after I had babies.
Mm.
And so and the one thing she always told me, because I always loved kids, I always thought I'd be a teacher. And she was like, you can be anything you want, but don't be a teacher. So I laughed when you said that because that is the exact mantra I grew up with in my house as well, from a woman who loved teaching and stuck with her entire career. So that made me laugh. But it's interesting that you swapped from teaching to nursing. And then the journey that took you on was so unexpected. COVID had a lot of really unexpected impacts in our lives. And so, interesting for a lot of people, they were negative, obviously. For you, it was like this time to really like spawn and expand your business and grow all of that. When you set out to be a nurse originally, what was kind of your goal? What was the impact you were hoping to have when you first started on that career path?
Originally I went into nursing with kind of my mama at the heart of it. My mama was like a mother to me, and she died when I was a teenager, and she had cancer. And so at the time, the only way you could get cancer care, because like I said, we lived in Eastern Kentucky, was to travel for it. And so I would often travel with her 2 hours to receive her radiation, her chemo, those sorts of things. And I knew what an impact that the nurses who took care of her even had on me and our family as well, because they treated us like family. And you get to know people and you build relationships and you build rapport. And so when I first went into nursing, like that was what I envisioned and imagined and hoped for. And I did become an oncology nurse, and I actually ended up working on the floor that she was treated on. And it was this beautiful, like 360 moment for me. But there's a lot of kind of like in teaching in some ways, there's a lot of bureaucracy and politics that go into being a nurse as well. And healthcare is ultimately a business. And so while it had pieces of what that initial dream looked like, it was definitely not completely the dream either.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it, talk to us. I guess I have so many different questions because there's so many different things. Maybe I should turn it over to Stan for a question for a minute because I always take all the good ones at the beginning. Go ahead, Stan. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. I want to go back, not spend a lot of time on this, but I want to find out about what was what was you skip over really fast. What was the program that you created that created all this value that people were willing to buy from you?
So it was a test prep company. It was literally called Sarah Michelle MP Reviews because everything in the MP space like has a name and a face on it, which is cool. So I also got to build a personal brand alongside it. And so what started as that little 3 hour Zoom recording course ended up being almost 25 hours of recorded courses. And we ended up doing a question bank and a live study group as well. And at the time, like there were live review courses, but the live study group was different in the sense of it was a 6 week program. And so like you would log in every day and be like, this is exactly how you're going to prepare today. This is the video I want you to watch. These are the questions I want you to do. And then let's meet up, let's talk about it and have these live sessions. And so that also kind of was like that rocket fuel and made it more successful because nobody had ever seen anything like that before in the space. And everybody was craving the certainty of like, okay, if I do the exact thing, then I will pass this exam.
Yeah,
So that was your idea?
yeah, and the
Yeah.
pressure of passing, if you've not done that, or I had a roommate who has lived this life, so I feel like it touches my soul in particular. if you've not done this piece of it, you really can't understand the stress and pressure of a test like this. So for our listeners who maybe are not in this space, the testing piece of this is like world ending,
It feels
all
life or
in,
death.
all you think about, all you do. It is for months and months, your entire life. So if that's not your background, I just want our listeners to know when Sarah Michelle talks about this, that is what she's talking about. This type of test prep, and especially the study group aspect, I think is a great and very unique piece. But that is what we're talking about. It is, imagine the most important, most stressful test of your life. That is what this test prep is for. Okay, back to you, Sarah. Back to you. I just wanted to give our listeners a little background from
No, it's
the roommate
important
life.
because imagine spending 3 to 5 years in school, 50 to 100 grand to get this degree. And if you don't pass this exam, it's worth nothing.
Right.
Like that is so high stakes. That feels so life or death in the moment. And that's why the mental health piece was such an important part of it too.
Yeah, and it's public too, right? Everybody
Yes.
knows, because that was her thing that stressed her out. Everybody knows that she's been in school for this. Everybody
Mhm.
knows that she's been studying for this nonstop. Everybody knows when testing day is. Everybody knows when results are going to be posted. And so there's this pressure of wanting to succeed because you've been working at this for a long time, and it's a very public success, which is beautiful, or a very public failure, which makes it really, really difficult and really puts the pressure on. So I love just kind of the uniqueness of the group that you built.
Yeah. So I want to skip past all that now. Pretty exciting stuff, though. I know to create all that and then to have people come along and willing to give you real money for it, that's got to be, it
Cool.
does make your day, right? So,
Mhm.
and it's also cool to be in a position where you don't have to worry about where your next meal's coming from. So you can now actually focus on doing the things that you were really born to do without having to worry about the money, right? So, and by the way, I just want to affirm that your decision to really step out and do, life changing things when you don't have to do it is something that you need to be commended for. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to reach out to you and have you be a guest on our podcast. And so, with that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about heart defects. You're saying that it's a really common birth defect, but it's not well funded. What are you doing now to change that? And are there any green shoots on the horizon that suggest that maybe there's change coming there?
I certainly hope there's changes coming. I feel like the biggest thing that I can possibly be doing right now, and it sounds so simple, it sounds too simple, is just increasing awareness. Because I became a nurse practitioner and I had no idea that 1 in 100 babies would have a heart defect. Like that was something I never heard until we got Meadows' diagnosis. And we can't change something that we're not aware of and we don't know is a problem. I think the other kind of, there's a few factors, but one, healthcare is a business, as I said. And so big pharma has no interest in heart defects because drugs don't fix heart defects. And so it's not a money maker. And so that becomes its own complexity, and that's really difficult. And that's part of why I feel so called to give to this cause too, because at the end of the day, if there are not people out there like me that are championing this cause, it just kind of gets hushed away. I also think too that this is a relatively new cause. And so what I mean by that is just 40 to 50 years ago, if my daughter had been born, there would have been no surgeries to fix her. They weren't invented yet. And so it was just in 2009 that the numbers flipped and there were more adults living with congenital heart disease than children. And that's a really important thing because that means for the first time these children were living into adulthood. And so this is kind of a relatively new problem at the end of the day. And so we're kind of up against trying to find new funding in a system that's archaic and a lot of the funding is set too. There's a lot of different pieces, but really like awareness is at the core of it. And just learning things like the 1 in 100 or there's now more adults or those sorts of things are incredibly helpful in painting the picture of what the future can look like. Because I mean, if my daughter had been born 40 to 50 years ago, she wouldn't be here today.
So I'm hearing stories now that there's going to be a significant cut in medical testing. Is that, have you heard, is that going to impact this area?
I'm getting whispers. I'm having a lot of anxiety right now because I kind of spent all of 2024 really working on the reauthorization of the Congenital Hearts Future Act. And so, what that act does is two things. Number one, it gives federal funding to congenital heart disease, but that funding is to the CDC and the NIH. And so, right now, that is a very tempestuous topic. And alongside that, we have these children that are living into adulthood, which is incredible, but we don't have specialized cardiologists to meet them where they're at. So we have millions of people living in the United States with congenital heart defects, but we only have 500 specialized cardiologists that specifically know adult congenital hearts. And so the other piece of that act was to increase that workforce. We were able to get it reauthorized last year, which was a really fun endeavor for me, especially coming from small town Kentucky to go to DC and march on Capitol Hill and felt like I was like really making a difference. And so we got it reauthorized, but now like funding is the big question. Like, are we actually going to get funded this year? Will we get funded next year? And what does that look like? And so I've been working within a couple of nonprofits specifically. How can we kind of all come together in our grassroots organizations and form a bigger organization that kind of takes on CHD as well? But I don't know if the federal dollars are always going to be there. And so I've kind of pivoted my approach into some of the nonprofits too.
Who are some of the nonprofits that are bringing leadership to this?
Definitely. So there's the ACHA, which is the Adult Congenital Heart Association, but obviously they touch on children as well. Conquering CHD is another big one. I actually just joined their board. And then for me, it's also important locally because we only have one main hospital in Kentucky that really does this innovative, creative approach to cardiac care. And I am so incredibly grateful and fortunate that it is 20 minutes from my house. So when Meadow was going through all of her stuff, we were able to kind of like have some pit stops at home. And we were at the hospital 90% of the time, but having the ability to kind of like shower in your own shower and lay in your own bed for a moment can really kind of reboot a parent. But I think local efforts are really important too. And so I'm also on the board of something called Brave Hearts here, where we support families that are going through a big diagnosis like this.
Is there some place in the country that's leading the way here? Is it in Kentucky?
I wish. I hope one day it will be. That's the plan. There are a couple of major centers that have kind of like specialty tracks, if you want to think of it that way. My daughter has the most severe type of her specific heart defect. And if she had like one more defect with it, we probably would have ended up in Stanford. So Stanford is a big one. Texas is another big one. Cincinnati Children's, which is actually pretty close to us, is within a couple of
Right.
hours. But our local children's hospital is of a top 50. So I'm excited to see them climb those rankings too.
So people who are listening, um, if they're motivated and inspired by you, what specific actions would you ask them to take to support what you're doing?
Well, right now, I am actually running something called a Women of Impact campaign. Have y'all heard of that before through the American Heart Association?
I have not.
I have not either.
So, the American Heart Association has done the most funding outside of the federal government for heart health. Now, that's not just specifically congenital heart disease, that's heart health across the lifespan. And so they nominated me last month, which was so cool and so incredible. And I still don't know if I feel worthy of a nomination, but they nominated me to be a woman of impact. And what it is a fundraising campaign for the next 9 weeks, where I kind of get to talk about congenital heart disease all the time and try to raise money in the meanwhile. And my hope is by winning this campaign, because obviously that's my goal, I don't necessarily care about the winning, but what I care about is being able to shine a light on congenital heart disease specifically, because right now it's one bucket that they pour into, but I want to make it a larger bucket because I was just talking about federal dollars are a lot different this year and are going to be different in the future too. And so I would say my big ask this year would be donating to my Women of Impact campaign. But outside of that, also on my website, I have a lot of different resources of how people can also just spread awareness amongst their own communities. Like even one simple post can make a world of difference because, if you post to your network, for example, you're going to have 1,000, 5,000, however many people that see that post that may have never even heard of congenital heart disease or it feels really abstract. And something that I like to tell people when they spread awareness, people get lost in statistics. They're like, oh, 1 in 100. Like it kind of like goes in one ear and out the other. I tell people to try to connect it to a story, which is why tell my daughter's story all the time and kind of what we've lived through. Because when you make causes feel less abstract, then it changes the game.
How's your daughter doing?
I love talking about my daughter because I tell people all the time she's the healthiest she's ever been. She's incredible. We know when she's 4 or 5, she'll probably have her next surgery, and that's just part of our life, and that's okay. But for today, she is so full of joy and she's so curious and she's so talkative. She just turned 2.5 a couple of weeks ago, and she's just so much fun. Like, I just really genuinely love being a mom, and I love specifically being her mom.
If you
Your
could, and this is a personal question, but if you could go back and talk to yourself that day that you got her CHD diagnosis just a few weeks before delivery, what wisdom would you impart? What encouragement would you give for maybe those people listening that are going through a diagnosis like this or don't yet know it yet, but may have a child coming with a diagnosis like this? What wisdom would you love to go back? What words would you love to hear on that hard day?
I mean, the very first thing that comes to mind is this is not your fault. I got very trapped in, was like, was it my deodorant or was it my shampoo or was it some genetic thing we didn't know about? And it's really easy to get trapped in that spiral. But at the end of the day, 80% of heart defects, they don't know the cause today. And that's just where we're at in medicine. And that's okay. But that's really hard to sit with because you want the control. Like, you want to know, like, what was it that caused this so we don't do this again in the future? Or how could this have been different? So I feel like over the last couple of years, I've been processing my own grief because I very much in the beginning, like the very day we got the diagnosis, I'm like, this is somehow my fault. And I just felt like so much guilt and so much blame. And that's a lot to sit with. And I didn't realize what a universal experience that was. And so I started to connect with other medical parents. There are a lot of people that feel that way. I think the other thing I'd wish I had known too is Meadow's identity is not her diagnosis. I felt like when she was a teeny tiny baby, she didn't really have like a personality yet, but we were so focused on her heart all the time, and that makes sense because obviously she was going through a lot of operations really quickly, but that is not her sole identity, and there's so much more to her outside of that, and that's something that I want to be really intentional as a parent about as she grows up. Like, your heart defect is a part of your life, and it's a part of your identity, but it is not you as a whole, too.
I love that. As a fellow mom, it's amazing how early and how easily the mom guilt starts,
Immediate.
Like as soon as you hear the words, you think, what did I do? What did I not do? What vitamin did I not take? What
Hmm.
product did I use that I shouldn't have? What did I eat that I shouldn't have? It starts even before baby's born. And then now that you have Meadow and she's a thriving toddler, that mom guilt doesn't stop. It continues. And our oldest kid is 16 and our littlest kid is 6, and they're all thriving. And I hate to tell you this, but the mom guilt doesn't get any better as you get older. I think it's just part of being a parent and that protective, that need to protect and do everything for your child. But I really salute you because you have gone above and beyond just wishing and hoping you could make a better world for her. You were actively involved in a bunch of different ways in trying to create the most opportunity for her and the best possible future for her. So as a fellow mom, I really salute you for that you are out there, boots on the ground, getting the work done. It is not an easy job to create change. We all know that. We've seen that. We've got changing administrations and constant politics. And it's amazing how political the medical world is, what a business the medical world is. If you're not part of that, you don't really see that. So I salute you for being out there trying to create that positive change for your own daughter, for Meadow, as well as for all of these other kids growing into adulthood with CHD as well.
Yeah, that's really kind of what spawned our donation to the hospital. Actually, we spent several months living in the hospital day in, day out, and we just like kept coming back to the fact like we were so grateful and so fortunate to even have the ability to just be there, because there's so much of your child's care that you can impact by being there day in and day out, because you know their nuances and you know your child, like you are an expert on your child. But not every parent, and I would say most parents, have that opportunity. Like, who can be off work for months and really tune into their child's care like that? And Meadow is an only child. That's a whole different ballgame. Like, what if we had other children at home? And so, like, by the time that we had made it home from the bulk of our hospital stay, we just like kept having conversations amongst ourselves too, like how can we make this different for other parents, and like how can we support what's going on locally too, because once we change what's going on locally, then we can kind of make larger scale impacts too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Stan, do you have any other questions for Sarah before we let her get back to the important work she's doing?
Is there any last thought, any other idea you'd like to share with us?
I think that a lot of people feel like they can't make much impact in the world of healthcare or business or wherever else. Like, you have these big ideas, but it's like, how do I actually execute that? But I really like to serve in the most humble way possible as an inspiration. I mean, I don't want to say I was just a nurse before, but I mean, I was a nurse working 3 12-hour shifts. My life was totally different. I had this one little spark of an idea for a business, and it changed my entire life. And when I talk to other business owners today, or people that want to leave a legacy and an impact, they kind of get stuck in the analysis paralysis a little bit. They're like, I have the idea, but like, how do I do it, all the things? And so what I tell people all the time, and what I like to leave people with too, is just start. Just throw it all out there, see what happens. Like, I made $250,000 in my business and I didn't have a functioning website. I had no website actually. Like, I was just selling Zoom recordings on Facebook Messenger, and it didn't have to be perfect. It could be a little bit messy. So just reminding people that you can be messy and that's okay too.
I
Good
love that.
advice.
That
Yeah,
is great
sure.
advice. Well, thank you for all of our listeners for joining us today. This has been the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast with your hosts, Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. And our guest today was Sarah Michelle Boes. And to connect with Sarah, you can visit sarahmichelleboes.com. Also, be sure to check out Sarah's podcast, the Real Deal Nurse Practitioner Club podcast. And Sarah, thanks again for all of the work that you are doing to make a positive impact on the world. We really appreciate you taking time to meet with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast with Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To find out more about Stan and Katie Beth, go to pinnaclelegacylaw.com. You can also find links in the show notes.
49 faces looked to him in triumph. Over the last 12 months, they had each taken turns and promoted his business for a week at a time, driving over $987,342 in revenue. What if you had a network of 50 centers of influence who promoted your business every week for a year? Grab your copy of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Ultimate Guide to Growing Your Business with a Podcast, at 33% off the Amazon price by going to ultimatepodcastbook.com. Again, that website for 33% off the Amazon price is ultimatepodcastbook.com.